Welcome back to AP Psych Unit 7. This next lesson is on sexual motivation as well as achievement motivation. As you can probably imagine, this is quite the fun lesson to cover in remote learning. And so we're going to begin actually with sexual motivation. Although to actually begin, first I'm going to show you some data around sex education in the United States as well as in our state of North Carolina. So there is actually no federal regulation for sex education in the US, but there are 19 states that require educators to teach sex should only happen after marriage. This would generally happen in a health and PE class in the health aspect of the class. There are also only 24 states that mandate any sex education is taught at all in general. This is including Washington, D.C. And there is actually only one state that mandates education in affirmative consent. And so when we get to North Carolina specifically, as of 2009, thanks to the Healthy Young Act, sex education must include the following. Abstinence should be presented as the safest choice and the expected standard for all school children. All FDA-approved methods of contraception should be mentioned. HIV and STD risks and prevention should be discussed, and sexual assault and sexual abuse risks and prevention. Now, for our topic specifically, we're not really going to be talking about any of those things. Instead, we're mostly looking at what's called the human sexual response, thanks to the pioneering work by the individuals of Masters and Johnson in 1966 into 1970. And the core around this is basically what is the human sexual response, which is what they divide into four stages, which is the sexual response stages of excitement, plateau, orgasm, and the resolution stage. Now, when these individuals were conducting their research, it was very difficult for Masters and Johnson to be published. People have obviously been having sex for a long time, but actually sharing those results, sharing the findings, publishing their findings proved to be rather difficult, as sex is kind of a taboo topic for a lot of people who are unwilling to discuss it. And so for Masters and Johnson to finally land on the cover of Time magazine and finally make progress in sharing their findings of the human sexual response, it was a pretty big deal. The human sexual response can basically be classified by this graph. You have a stage of initially building arousal. The arousal is going to eventually plateau. This leads to the orgasm stage. And then lastly, the post-orgasm stage is the resolution. This is when sexual arousal declines. So in the excitement phase, as you can see, physical arousal builds rapidly. There's a rise in things like breathing and heart rate and blood pressure. This is also going to pump blood flow to localized areas of the body, typically the pelvic regions, as blood vessels become engorged for sexual arousal, and then other body changes. In the plateau phase, you have a continued building of arousal. You have, again, more body changes. Obviously, we can read, so I'll let you read. There you go. Then you have the orgasm phase. When an orgasm is reached, this is indicative of peak intensity and arousal for sexual arousal, and so it's discharged through muscular contractions that will pulsate through the pelvic region. Also, in the case of orgasms for men, this includes one intense orgasm through contraction and ejaculation. During the orgasm phase, blood pressure and heart rate are also at their peak, and so following this stage, we have the resolution. The resolution stage is when arousal must return to normal. It is possible that there could be unpleasant sexual tension if the orgasm was not actually achieved. And then lastly, terminology to note is what's called the refractory period. And this was actually discussed in Unit 2 when we're looking at dealing with the neuron, and specifically the refractory period of a firing of a neuron. But now we're talking about more time. So this refractory period is the time following male orgasms where they're largely unresponsive to further stimulation. This is now measured into minutes, into hours, whereas the refractory period of a neuron is measured more in seconds and milliseconds. Now, what else should we know other than the four stages of the human sexual response? Basically, you should know about what's called parental investment theory. Parental investment theory is basically taking a look at the sexual behavior of human beings, but from an evolutionary lens. And so think about what each person actually offers to invest and produce an offspring. What is a man offering, and what is a woman offering? At least this is in the case of a heterosexual couple, but in a heterosexual relationship, a man really does not offer a whole lot to the production of an offspring, and sometimes to the nurturing of an offspring. But the female, the woman, typically gives a lot more to the nurturing and production of an offspring. So men typically offer sperm, women offer an egg that creates the unionized cell, reference the last unit, the zygote. However, there's a lot more given up by women. Women offer their time. They offer their energy of their body. They have survival risks. They may have to forego opportunities. They may have to take a step back in their career. It's already fairly common knowledge that women are paid less than men across the board. These factors make men and women investors, but different levels of investors. So the theory is that a small investor is typically going to pursue sex more. A large investor is typically going to be more conservative in their sexual mating behavior. And so men, they're the ones typically classified as a small investor, whereas women are classified as a large investor. Think about what's really at stake. Who is having to put a lot more at risk for themselves, and that person is not a man. Because of this, and because of men being small investors, men typically show more interest in sexual activity with a variety of partners, and are also typically more interested in willing to engage in uncommitted sex. So they want to have sex, but not necessarily in a relationship. Again, because as a small investor, there's a lot less at stake for you and a lot less at risk. Women, on the other hand, typically would want to be more conservative in their mating behavior, given the fact that there is a lot more at stake for them. When it comes to gender preferences, gender differences in mating preferences, historically, from the evolutionary lens, again, men have emphasized physical attraction as well as youthfulness, because this has typically been associated with fertility. So men who saw someone who was young and who they were physically attracted to, they believed that person was more fertile and more physically able to produce a healthy offspring. Women, on the other hand, while are also interested in physical attractiveness, women emphasize other qualities such as intelligence, ambition, income, and social status. So it's not necessarily just about the physical attraction, but also about some other healthy components of life. Also within the unit, we have the controversial issue of pornography. Men typically consume more pornography than women, and also report in enjoying erotic material more, but this is often because pornography targets men. There's been many researchers who have tried to study the link between pornography and sex crimes, and it's been decided that porn plays a very minor role, if any, in fueling sexual offenses. However, those that do consume aggressive pornography typically can show an increased response towards aggression towards females. So this is men viewing aggressive pornography who may show an increased aggression towards females. But pornography today also does have other harmful effects. I think it can create certain standards for sexual behavior that are maybe unrealistic. So for the developing mind, who in the age of the internet has easier and faster access to technology, and unfortunately pornography as well, may actually be developing in a way physically, but also mentally, cognitively, certain views about pornography and sexual behaviors that are not realistic. And as a result, this could cause problems in relationships as they age and possibly explore human sexuality. As we move to the next topic, we have affiliation and achievement, the search for excellence. So what we're going to take a look at here is a couple of metrics and standards used for identifying affiliation and achievement, and then a couple of diagrams, and then we'll be done. So first question I would ask you to think about is what actually makes your life happy? And what is the most satisfying moment you've had in the previous week of your life? You know, right now, if you're watching this lesson in 2020, it's currently April of 2020. We are living under quarantines. So the most satisfying moment of your life in the previous week may be a hard thing to isolate. And we're all actually experiencing some form of social isolation at the moment, which puts us at risk for mental declines and ill health. This is why there's many people who are starting to protest about wanting to go back to work. It is true that long-term social isolation puts us at risk for those things. However, we have to kind of balance and weigh out the risk of social isolation versus not socially distancing and socially isolating ourselves and risking exposure to COVID-19. So in the studies that have been found, at least for social isolation, there's been studies with doctors' visits in patients with dementia. There is studies on ostracism and the idea that people get excluded. Today, in this day and age of the internet, it's very easy to notice social exclusion. If you are browsing social media and you see all your friends, and then you're wondering, like, why were you not invited? Or why were you not part of that picture? You can deal with breakups that can cause ostracism. Looking at pictures of an ex, again, social exclusion, ostracism from these things. People get caught up in this kind of stuff. So social isolation does put us at risk for mental decline and ill health. Usually it doesn't put us at our best. Human beings are creatures that need to socialize at some point. We have a need to belong. And one of the ways that we often feel some sense of belongingness is through social networks. Social networks actually are like a social amplifier. They allow you to have connections with people in certain ways, whether they're very generalized ways or whether they're very intimate ways. They amplify your network, who you know and who you have access to. For some people, it's an online matchmaker. We have some issues with the idea of disclosing information on social networks. What are we going to actually disclose? Some people would disclose more than others. Some people would feel more comfortable to disclose more than others. And then some people disclose way too much information. And this may be a case of self-esteem gone wild, showing some signs of narcissism. I would encourage you during the time of social isolation to go on a nature walk and recharge the batteries. So let's talk about achievement. Achievement is a motivation. It's a social motivation that not everyone's going to share. Of course, a lot of people may have some form of achievement motivation, but not to the same level. In life, a lot of people are driven to master certain challenges or a specific challenge, and actually are driven to want to be better than others at that challenge and meeting what they consider to be a standard of excellence. But this is not an easy thing to pull off. So there's a test of achievement motivation. It's a projective test, which we'll be looking at more examples in the second half of this unit, part B on personality. But this is called the TAT, the Thematic Apperception Test. And basically, I'm going to show you some pictures. They're meant to be vague, and then you would respond. Someone who has an understanding and ability to assess your response off of the TAT is indicative of possibly showing you how your score could be correlated with career success. So take a look. Here's an example, image number 1. When you look at this picture, you should think about what comes to mind first for you. What are you thinking? How do you assess the situation that you're looking at? Here's picture number 2. Again, how do you assess this one? Obviously, I'm purposefully not giving you any descriptions here. I want you to just think about them. And then picture number 3. So what comes to mind? How do you assess the scenario? Yada, yada, yada. That's part of the TAT. Another thing I'd like to show you, this is from an individual named Sylvia Duckworth, and this is called the iceberg illusion. When you think about achievement and success, I think the dangerous part about this, especially with the amplified social networks that we have, it's very easy to get caught up in someone else's successes and not necessarily see all of the things that are kind of invisible. There's a lot of things for success, a lot of contributors to success that we don't typically see. And so I really like this diagram that she's made here, the iceberg illusion. Like an iceberg, success is visible above the surface. It's the part of the ice above the surface. But what about all that ice below the water? The failures, the discipline, the perseverance, the disappointment, the sacrifice, the dedication. We don't always see those things. Because of social networks and, again, social amplification, we end up seeing the success. So this is something to think about. We've also got Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We'll be hitting this in the next part of the unit more, but this is also attributed with achievement and motivation. And we're motivated by fulfilling certain stages off the pyramid from the bottom up. And so, for example, as I would tell my students, a student that comes to school who's hungry, who is uh, scared, or who is extremely tired because they don't have a safe environment to go home to, that student's number one priority at school is not necessarily learning. It's not learning because they have learning placed somewhere higher up on the hierarchy of needs, but at the bottom, they have many physical needs that are not being met. And as a result, how could they focus on learning when you're coming to school hungry and you're coming to school tired because you don't get to feel safe where you're sleeping at night? And so those are big components of education that are sometimes misunderstood and unignored. Finally, when we get to the end here, a couple of pieces of relatable vocabulary for achievement motivation. So sometimes these are found in social psych. Sometimes you can place them here. But we have what's called the over-justification effect, which is to say if you start suddenly being rewarded for something that you already like doing, you might actually start to like it less. So if you're intrinsically motivated to read books, you read for the sake of reading and you enjoy that, and suddenly your class starts getting rewards, you get extra credit for every book that you read, what happens is your love of reading gets replaced by a extrinsic motivation. And if I pulled that reward out from under you, you're not going to go back to just loving reading for the sake of reading, because now conditioning has occurred and you're expecting those rewards. And so this can be a really dangerous thing. We've also got destiny, internal versus external locus of control. So an internal locus of control saying that you control your destiny. I, for internal locus of control, I control my own destiny. External locus of control is to suggest that everyone else or others control my destiny. So think about the E of external, everyone else. I of internal, I control it. I control it, others control it. And that'll do it for this lesson on sexual motivation and achievement motivation. As always, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.